welcome to everyone here, and thank you for joining us today. We are very privileged to have with us Dr. Vijayendra Rao. He is a lead economist in the Development Economics Research Group at the World Bank, where he's been working, I think, since 1999, so for some time. And there he's also the head of the Social Observatory, which is an interdisciplinary team of researchers, which is aimed at, among other things, at fostering rigorous and inclusive research. So Biju's work and that of the larger Social Observatory fits very neatly with what I would say is the sort of ethos of our department. So he's an economist by training, but he's really unique in that he is foregrounding, the softer social sciences and really speaking to their strengths. So he's bringing in anthropology and sociology and political science and arguing for the value of using those different, sorts of approaches and the different methods that they entail to provide some unique insights to the big social scientific questions and to complement more standard economic approaches. And of course, being at the World Bank, these aren't just because of the social scientific value of the questions, but also because of their importance for development problems. He's worked across his career on a wide range of topics. Primary among them would be questions about participatory development and deliberative democracy, which he'll be talking to us today about. I know some of his work on dowries and festivals in India. He's done other work on the economics of sex work, so a really wide range of research interests. And notable too is the fact that some of his collaborators like Tim Beasley are here at the LSC, so we're happy to welcome him back to the LSC, at least virtually, and specifically to our Department of Methodology. So it's our pleasure to have Biju here to talk with us today, and he's going to be talking to us about two related projects with a overarching title of Deliberative Democracy in India, Innovations in Qual and Quant Methods. So with that, we'll hand it over to you, Biju, and look forward to it. And we'll take some questions after you get through your talk.
Thanks, Eleanor, for that very, very kind introduction. It's such a pleasure to talk to all of you. What I'm going to be talking about today consists of a book and two papers. So I have 35 minutes. So we'll see how far we get. But at least what I want to do is to give you a flavor of how we use some of the methods, what sort of methodological innovations we did to get at this very sort of big question. And then I welcome questions and after I say my piece. So let's just plunge right into it. What is deliberation and why deliberation, right? So I'm just sort of trying to frame it in a theoretical context, so you sort of see why we're doing what we're doing. Now, most of us are used to thinking of democracy as being electoral. In the US, we're all caught up on this right now, as you can imagine. And what is the purpose of an election? It's really to solve a problem in collective action, which is basically you have a population of people who have different interests, different preferences, different things they want done. And so what we do in an electoral election is that we vote for a representative to represent the interests of the collective. Yeah. So in that sense, we are aggregating our preferences through the process of a vote to elect a representative who will represent our interests. Yeah. So that sort of is one resolution to the problem of collective action. Another resolution, which is a much older resolution, goes back in most countries to the beginning of time, is to get together, thrash it out, discuss things, persuade people, change their views to your point of view, and you come to a consensus on what to do. Yeah. And that is basically the process of deliberation. It's a process of achieving consensus through conversation. Yeah. So if electoral, John Elster put this very nicely. He said, electoral democracy is about the aggregation of preferences. Deliberative democracy is about the transformation of preferences, where I can persuade you of a point of view, my point of view, and make us all think alike. Yeah. So, there's been a lot of theoretical work on this normative work. You see it, of course, famously with the Greeks, going actually far before Aristotle. But then, I guess it acquired a lot of salience with John Stuart Mill, and then Rousseau and everybody else, until you come to the 20th century, you come to Habermas, who's still alive, and really brought this to the fore. And then, of course, currently there's a lot of wonderful political scientists like Jane Mansbridge and others who've been writing about it. In economics, there's been less of a move towards it, but it's slowly coming. But interestingly, development policy over the last 20 years has moved sharply towards giving citizens the ability, or what we used to call beneficiaries, the ability to make decisions for themselves, which involve coming to collective decisions as they do these things. And in a book called Localizing Development that we did, that I co-wrote 8 years ago now, we showed that about $100 billion in World Bank lending alone has gone for this, which is at that time, so 2012. So if you take everything together, we're looking at about $500 billion that the international community has spent in developing countries on this. So there's an enormous amount of money, attention, effort going into this stuff. But we don't know very much about how well it works in practice, how well deliberation works in practice, outside lab settings. We know how these projects work. There's a fair amount of research on that, but we don't know how people talk and how they arrive at decisions. Okay, so I guess I'll do it that way. All right. So now, in a Western democratic context, and that's the work of Habermas and others, Habermas particularly said that deliberation is premises on the equality of voice. That is, the people in that room making that decision are more or less of the same socioeconomic status. And then the focus becomes on the importance of speech and of listening and achieving consensus, building mutual agreement and so on. But the presumption of equality is very central to a lot of the normative, at least the early normative work on deliberation in Western democracies. And much of the work is normative. If you study, deliberative democracy is a huge topic in political science. 90% of it is normative. Yeah. Now, those conditions do not apply in poor countries, where you might have, one other condition, of course, is that everybody's literate. So we're talking about rural India, where when I was doing these recordings, we had literacy rates between 30 to 70%. Yeah, a lot of illiterate people. And of course, all the usual constraints of caste inequality, structural inequality of different kinds, gender inequality. Different folks have different styles of speech. So all of these things make deliberation a very, very difficult thing in theory to do in a non-Western context, in a poor country context. Yeah. So part of the effort here is to sort of see whether that's true. Now, what is probably the largest deliberative institution in human history is the Indian Gram Sabha. And I'll talk a little bit more about it, because it covers all 2 million villages. It doesn't happen in urban areas, in rural areas, covering about 850 million people. And these meetings, which are village meetings, meet 2 to 4 times a year, depending on the state. Yeah. And this, of course, has relevance to many other parts of South Asia. You have similar institutions in Nepal now. You have similar institutions in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and they used to be in Sri Lanka. They're coming back. Yeah. So it's all over South Asia. It's in many parts of Africa, and of course, it's almost ubiquitous in Southeast Asia. So these are institutions like this are quite common. Just that India is the biggest at everything, so we have the biggest body. Now, I'm going to first start with my book with Paramita Sanyal on oral democracy, which was published last year, and which is both a normative and an empirical analysis of Gram Sabhas in India. Give you a bit of history around the Gram Sabhas. These all sort of got a spark. There's a longer history that we go through in the book, but let me start in 1992, which was the 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution, which instituted regular elections to village councils. Yeah, so every village has an elected body, a council, with elections held every 5-6 years. They elect a president, they elect a council. So sort of it's a president with a parliament. Yeah, along with Gram Sabhas, village meetings where anybody can come. Yeah, any person in the village can come, and many, many important decisions like the village budget, selection of beneficiaries, and so on are ratified in the Gram Sabha. Yeah? The other important innovation made in the 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution was that 1/3 of all seats of presidents and of ward members in the village council were reserved for women. There were similar reservations for underprivileged castes, for Dalits. And so it's sort of a hybrid institution, the Indian Panchayat system, where there is deliberation embedded within an electoral system. Yeah. And we've shown, Tim Besley, Rohini Pandya and I showed some time ago that all of this, that having these meetings was highly correlated with a reduction in corruption and a reduction in clientelism. What is the purpose of the Gram Sabha? It's to ratify beneficiaries for public programs. I mean, so there's various types of methods of picking beneficiaries, usually with a means test survey. But the Gram Sabha then decides whether that list makes sense, whether these people are in fact deserving. They debate expenditures on public goods and public meetings. They monitor and track the performance in the council. And the way it's described in the Constitution is sort of the legislature to the executive. Yeah? So everybody in the village is a member of parliament, essentially. And that's where the Gram Sabha comes in. Now, what is interesting about India, of course, is that it's a very federal structure. So the states have a lot of power in how they institute national policy. So there was a 73rd Amendment of the Constitution in 1992, and then each state had to enact a state act where they turned that constitutional amendment into actual policy, and that happened in 1992, and goes on to this day. I'll be focusing on the four South Indian states, in the state of Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. And broadly speaking, to explain the differences in how these states enacted this amendment in their state acts, Kerala is very famously the most effective of panchayat systems. They in 2000 instituted something called a People's Campaign, where they trained citizens in how to make decisions and to make neighborhood plans. And that so they go from the neighborhood, literally a street, to the ward to the village, and then at the village level. And villages in Kerala are very big, about 100,000 people. They have a plan associated with particular budget allocations, and they have very large budgets. Kerala gives 40% of the state budget to the village panchayat, and of course Kerala has almost 100% literacy, unlike other parts of India. Karnataka were the pioneers of the panchayat system. They started it in the mid 80s. In fact, the Indian constitutional amendment borrowed the Karnataka system and nationalized it. And unlike the other states, it's a parliamentary style. The president is not elected directly, but appointed by the village council that is elected. And also in Karnataka, there's a strong difference between the north and the south of Karnataka. Tamil Nadu is again similar to Karnataka. We're calling Kerala high quality, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu low quality, medium quality. Tamil Nadu is also a very active panchayat system like Karnataka. There's an important role for self-help groups there, and presidents are elected directly. Yeah. Now, Andhra Pradesh is the other end of the spectrum from Kerala. Andhra Pradesh, and I'm talking about the old Andhra Pradesh, for those of you who know India, before it was split up into Telangana and Andhra. So southern Andhra Pradesh is still like this. Northern Andhra Pradesh, old Andhra Pradesh, Telangana has become different. But let's talk about Andhra Pradesh as a unified entity at this point. It's very low quality panchayat systems. They basically tried to destroy the panchayat system by centralizing everything. They in fact didn't hold elections for a long time for the panchayat system till they were dragged to the Supreme Court and forced to do it. So it's a very technocratic, top-down state that tried hard to destroy the panchayat system. The Supreme Court forced them to have elections and to have Gram Sabhas, but they wouldn't have done it otherwise. Yeah. Now, coming to the data, these recordings were done between 2002 and 2004. They're quite old now. And we recorded 300 Gram Sabhas in each of these states. They were transcribed and translated into English from the 4 South Indian languages. They were sampled following a natural experiment, which I'll describe in a second. There are variations in literacy that we exploit at the village level. And the focus of this book, I don't know if you can see me, but that's the book, is on discourse, on what I have called with Mike Walton the equality of agency. That is the ability of people to speak and to be heard. Yeah, that's really the focus. And importantly, methodologically, this is a handmade analysis. Paramit and I worked on this darn book for 10 years, yeah? Because we had took each one of those Gram Sabha transcripts, and each Gram Sabha lasts about 90 minutes, yeah, on average. And we coded them by hand, and we read every transcript, and and developed analytical categories, and and so on and so forth. And I make a joke that in that period, between the two of us, there was one baby, one marriage, 3 shifts in jobs, 25 other papers, 4 books that happened before this book happened. So it took an awfully long time. Yeah. But we're very proud of the book because I think, I hope at least, I should say, I hope that effort shows in the book. Now, that's a national experiment. You can, those of you know India, see a map of South India, but it's a little bit of a weird map, because what I've done here is to overlay the old boundaries, the pre-independence boundaries of the states over the post-1956 boundaries of the states, right? So as you may know, in 1956, all Indian states were reorganized along linguistic lines. But prior to 1956, these entities, these subnational entities, had an identity that had been constant for several hundred years, 300, 400 years, from the Mughal Empire, from the old South Indian kingdoms, and so on. And then, of course, the British came in and had direct rule as well. So what you had before 1956 was old Hyderabad state, and you can see that in the north. Old Hyderabad state spoke different languages, Marathi, Telugu, Kannada. The national language of Hyderabad state was Urdu. And then you had Travancore as a part of Kerala, and then you had vastly dominated by the Madras presidency, which was direct rule by, I mean, this was after the war with Tipu Sultan, that the British took over vast amounts of territory that was previously ruled by Tipu, and it's directly ruled by the British from, in this case, the city of Madras, which is currently in Tamil Nadu. Now, 1956, the Panikkar Committee comes in and reorganizes everything, and says, this is crazy, this kind of thing, of this hodgepodge. Let us reorganize states so that within the boundaries of the state, they speak the same language. So then you had the modern states of Andhra Pradesh, where they spoke Telugu, Karnataka, where they spoke Kannada, Tamil Nadu, where they spoke Tamil, and Kerala, where they spoke Malayalam. Now, here's where we get to play with a national experiment, because when you make these boundaries along linguistic lines, you can never do it perfectly. You'd have a Kannada speaker sitting in Tamil Nadu, you'll have a Telugu speaker sitting in Karnataka, and so on and so forth. And if you follow linguistic theory, there's something called a linguistic community that says that discourse is often determined by the language we speak, by the geography in which we live, by the socioeconomic conditions of that geography, of that space, what sort of crops do we grow, what sort of political structure, and of course by administrative history. Yeah. So particularly in deliberation for a political purpose, for making these decisions, that administrative history matters a lot. I'm going much slower than I thought. I need to speed up. Okay. So what we do is we sample villages on either side of the modern state border that prior to 1956 belonged to the same political entity. Yeah. So in that way, those two villages control for administrative history. So they had a common history for 300 years. Yeah. And we sample them such that they speak the same language. Okay, so we're speaking, let's go up here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you go to Hyderabad state, you say Bidar and Medak. Medak is currently actually in Telangana, but in 2004 in Andhra Pradesh. Bidar is in Karnataka. You see those dots, those are the villages we sampled. These are both Kannada speaking villages in Medak and Kannada speaking villages in Bidar. Similarly, go down here to Tamil Nadu and Kerala, you see Coimbatore district and Palakkad district, both of which belong to Madras presidency prior to 56. We are sampling Tamil speakers on both sides. Okay, so we're controlling for both language and administrative history. Now, by all theoretical sort of considerations that we know from linguistic theory and from political science, they should have the same style of discourse. Yeah. That would be sort of the null hypothesis. Okay, so here's some pictures of Gram Sabhas in case you haven't seen them, and I'm just going to run through this. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to compare Chittoor district in Andhra Pradesh, Dharmapuri district, and I'm not going to read too many excerpts now because of a shortage of time, but I want to show you what happens in these Gram Sabhas and why they're so different. So we're going to compare these Andhra Pradesh, what we call low quality Gram Sabhas to medium quality in Dharmapuri. And the book then goes on to various kinds of comparisons, Medak and Bidar, Coimbatore and Palakkad, Dakshin Kannada and Kasaragod, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to just quickly read two excerpts, one from Chittoor district, a Gram Sabha in Chittoor district, and compare it to the Gram Sabha in Dharmapuri district in Tamil Nadu, which is literally 10 kilometers away. Yeah, these two villages, they're 10 kilometers away from each other. So let's start with Chittoor. And I'm reading the entirety of the Gram Sabha. This is the whole thing. The president starts, today we're conducting this Gram Sabha to discuss the problems in our village and the various activities we have undertaken so far. You can express your problems here. And a villager says, there is no proper community hall in this village for holding marriages or events. We should construct a community hall. President says, I will inform the government to construct a community hall and to provide all facilities to conduct meetings. I will try my level best to construct a community hall. The villager says, there are no cement roads in the village. Cement roads should be laid out in all the village streets. The president says, wherever we don't have cement roads, I will try and get them constructed at the earliest. And this sort of goes on a little bit. The last line of the Gram Sabha is, a villager says, we have complained to the Panchayat office, but till now there is no solution to these problems. They are threatening us. The president says, I've given a complaint to the collector regarding this, but nothing has happened. I'm helpless regarding this issue. This whole thing lasts literally 5 minutes, the entire Gram Sabha. Okay? And they basically just this silly accounting of desires the president can't fulfill, right? Now let's go 10 kilometers away to Tamil Nadu, and this is a 2-hour-long Gram Sabha. I'm going to read small excerpts. A local administrator comes in and says, now the main agenda of today's meeting is to maintain the hygiene and cleanliness of the surroundings. This means that everybody should keep their house and surroundings clean. And if you keep your house and surroundings clean, the streets will also be clean. So the government really wants a clean village. You should be working with us for a clean village. And he goes on to explain all the implications of not having the village clean, all the various, ailments you'll get, diarrhea and so on, and why good sanitation is important and how you should do it and what you should do. Then as soon as he finishes his speech, which goes on for half an hour, the villagers start talking all together, many voices. Now, we already do this. What are you telling us? We already clean people, and he says, no, you're correct. But when it's not about what you do in your homes, it's what you do outside. The villager says, but you're not paying us to have our own toilets. You're only giving us 500 rupees. The fellow says, I'm giving you 500, but you can put in 1,500 out of your pockets and make this happen. I mean, there's a lot of back and forth, going on along these lines. I'm not, and then another villager changes the topic and says, there's no water in the village. What do you plan to do about it? And you should have proper pipelines from the lake and so on. Anyway, you can see the point. This is a real discussion. Yeah, this is a real discussion, a real debate. They're trying to come to some kind of consensus. And you can read the book, which is, by the way, the book is a free download on Cambridge University Press's site. So it's open access in case you're interested. Yeah. Now, what is the effect of literacy? What we did with this is that within the same district, we're not doing a cross-district comparison, looking at the same district, we're comparing low literacy and high literacy villages. And in Andhra Pradesh, interestingly, low literacy and medium literacy villages have absolutely no difference. They don't show any difference at all. The difference comes in Bidar, in this medium capacity state, where there's a huge difference between low literacy and high literacy villages. Now go down to Kerala, or you again see no difference at all in Kerala villages. In fact, everybody's literate, so there's no difference by definition. So the point of that slide is to show you that literacy doesn't matter in as much in a Gram Sabha as what the state is doing in terms of facilitating the space. So in other words, state policy can make all the difference. Okay. So I'm now going to go to the other paper, which is Deliberative Democracy in an Unequal World, which is basically using a different technique to ask the similar questions. Now, the questions in this paper is given the context, and this is all in Tamil Nadu, we're doing it in one state, given the context of Gram Sabhas effective forums for citizen participation, and is there gender equality in Gram Sabhas, can it be improved? And we're looking at 3 metrics, what we're calling equality of participation, what we're calling a gender setting power. That's when somebody speaks, how much does that topic get carried forward by the group? Yeah, so it was how much influence does a particular individual have on the kinds of speech that the group takes up? And then the responsiveness of the state. To what extent is the state listening to what people are saying and responding to them? Yeah. The data are about 100 Gram Sabhas we recorded on January 26, 2014. Those of you who know India know that's Republic Day. Gram Sabhas happen in Tamil Nadu on Republic Day. May Day, Independence Day, and yeah, so there's one more, I forget, yeah. So, and it's part of an, anyway, in this paper, we're looking at 50 gram sabhas. We have another paper, we look at the 100, which is look at the impact of an intervention. I'm not going to talk about that paper unless it's interest. It's really about asking, when you have an intervention that introduces women's self-help groups, does that change the quality of discourse? The way we did this, the recordings, was we sent field enumerators to, at that time, in this case, we had to have this big thing where 200 field enumerators and 100 teams were sent to all these gram sabhas with a recording, with a digital recorder. And then they also did a survey on the side and covered the topics that went on, so we could validate the speech when we started analyzing it. And we're using NLP here, natural language processing method. So each speech act, that is, if I'm talking now, but people are having a conversation and I said something before you came on and said what you had to say, that is one speech act, okay? In this particular corpus, we have 1,736 such documents, and we can identify them. Now, one of the things I didn't want to do was to run with a survey just as people were talking, who are you, what are you, how old are you, and so on. So all we did is what we could observe. Are they citizens or administrative officers, elective officers, and obviously their gender. And interestingly, in this case, about 50% female attendance, so it's quite high. Now, we're using natural language processing methods, which means that we have to clean the data, which we have to sort of take away strange words, infrequent words, proper nouns, and so on, and remove what are called stop words, prepositions, basic verbs, which don't give you, they don't have information content in the analysis. And then we have to stem words, so the word repair, for instance, whether it's repair or repairs or repaired, all become repair. Otherwise, the computer sort of gets confused and starts treating them as different. So that helps analyze the data. We're using a structural topic model, which where the model sort of goes through the data and inductively discovers topics or mixtures, clusters of words that occur together. Yeah, there are other methods we could have used, but this is one we picked. Now we can expand, we can train the computer to look for a certain number of topics. So we've used 15, 20, and 25. I think I'll be reporting on 20 here. And what the machine does, the program does, that it identifies what are called frex words, which are frequent words that are exclusive to each topic, frequent words and those that are exclusive to each topic. And then you have to look at those words as they come and figure out as researchers what the heck that cluster of words is about. Yeah. And that, of course, requires you to read every document. You have to read it. There's no way of getting around it. You're not coding it. The computer is coding it for you in a way of speaking. So let's look at what we got. So you can see the topics, the clusters of words that came together. Look at the first cluster. The highest probability words were water, road, tank, street, facility, arrange, get. The frex word were road, water, fix, tank, pipe, street, drink. Let's take another one. Let's take service failures. The highest probability words were come, tell, want, say, money, done, commotion. And then the frex words were say, tell, commotion, money, want, come, bus. So we stare at that and sort of say, okay, and then we go back. It gives you these frequently occurring words. You can click on that and then sort of go and read the actual text where they came from, and we assign them topic labels. Yeah, and these were the topic labels from water, beneficiaries, employment and wages, and so on, right down to the maintenance of public goods. Now, let's see how those topics are distributed. And you can see water sort of dominates the conversations. About 15% of the corpus consists of water topics, and the maintenance of public goods is only about 4%. Yeah, so that's the distribution. Yeah. Let's now plunge into the analysis. We're going to first look at the frequency of citizen speeches by gender. Yeah? And in raw, not surprisingly, men like to talk more than women, and there's a hugely big difference in that. But however you normalize it, that stays on. Yeah? Length of speeches, men don't only like to talk, they like to talk a lot. So there's a lot of mansplaining that goes on, and you sort of see that with all speeches, male speeches tend to be much longer than female speeches, about, let's say, about 15% longer. But notice that that difference in the raw means is not from citizens, it's coming from politicians. It's male politicians who like to talk, not male citizens, yeah, more than women. Again, if you're following American politics, that shouldn't be a surprise. Okay, agenda setting power. So we've established that men talk more, and it's coming mainly from politicians, not from citizens. Now, agenda setting power is the way we measure that is if the next speech following your speech includes the same topic. That's one measure. The next measure is whether the next 5 speeches include the same topic, okay? So if you look at that, we're running a regression here where we're controlling for a whole bunch of things. And we're just going to focus here on whether a woman speaks, whether citizens speak, and then we're interacting female and citizen. And what you see very clearly, and this is, to me, this particular table makes me very hopeful for this space, right? Because citizens dominate the conversation by far. Yeah, it's not dominated by politicians. It's dominated by citizens once you control for everything else. Yeah, but you can see here the female and citizen interaction term that women tend to have less agenda setting power. Yeah, so there's a fair amount of gender discrimination there. It's not significant, but it's a 10% effect. So it's a pretty large effect. Now, one of the interesting things about Indian villages, I said, was 1/3 of all seats for village president are reserved for women. As I said, what is interesting about this is they are randomly assigned. So we have another nice sort of RCT implicitly built into this that we're going to exploit, right? So what we're going to see, we're going to now ask, what happens to women speakers when you have a woman in charge of the village, right? That's the interaction between female and female president. And you see that female gender discrimination effect completely disappears, completely. In fact, they tend to speak more, about 6% more, yeah? So if you have a woman president, women are more comfortable speaking and more comfortable and are more likely to have agenda setting power, most importantly. Yeah, they're more likely to have agenda setting power. Yeah. Now let's look at the responsiveness of the state. The way we measure this, it's a value of 1 if citizen speech is followed by official speech. Yeah, and that official addresses the primary or secondary topic of the citizen speech. In other words, that this state official, either the president or a local administrator, is responding to what the citizen is saying by just following the same topic. Yeah. Now, what do you see here? If there's any official response, there's no difference across gender. But if there is an on-topic response, men are more likely to get an official response than women. And almost all that effect is coming from the response of politicians. Administrators are not discriminatory on gender, but politicians are, right? Once again, we're going to run that regression with our experiment with female presidents, and you see magically, look at that last row there, that when you interact female with female president, that effect disappears. In other words, when you have a woman in charge, a woman president, randomly assigned, she tends to be much more responsive to a woman speaker, to a woman citizen. Yeah. So this is all in speech, by the way. This is all speech analysis, and that's the important thing to keep in mind. Yeah. So what do we conclude from all of this? I'm on time. Very good. We've shown in oral democracy, and as I said, I would, if you're interested in this, I would urge you to read the book because it's obviously far more detailed than what I could have done here. Forums for deliberative democracy can be improved with policy interventions, and this is something that, again, I think is very important for policy because there's really not much thought given to this. How do we shape forums for deliberative democracy? I mean, they say it has to be organic, but no, we've shown you that Kerala has basically set up a space that works better than Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu has set up a space that works much better than Andhra Pradesh because of what the state government did, because of that national experiment. Yeah, low literacy matters, but it matters much less than, in fact, the extent to which the state government has emphasized the space. And then again, there's a lot of citizen deliberation that takes place. I've shown you that in the book. I've shown you that in the NLP analysis, despite caste inequality and everything else. I've done other work showing that, in fact, Dalits are more likely to speak. I've shown, so there are other papers related to all of this that get into that a little bit more. Citizens dominate the discussion, but there is strong gender inequality in almost every aspect of speech. Yeah? But affirmative action for women presidents results in greater responsiveness. Yeah. So overall, this is an optimistic story. There's a long way to go, and because these things are now constitutionally sanctioned, they're going to be there hopefully forever. so long as there is an Indian state, and hopefully they're going to get better with time. Now, in methods, in the book, Oral Democracy, I think the thing to take away from that is there's a lot of potential in applying causal inference kind of thinking to doing qualitative analysis. Yeah, anthropologists, sociologists don't think in those terms. Economists tend to think in terms of causal inference, but combining the two gives you an enormous amount of leverage over understanding what's going on here. Now, there's a fair amount of work trying to going along these lines now. So if you're interested, I can talk about that. NLP allows you to speed up the qualitative analysis. Yeah. And you can test, and one of the great advantages of NLP is we are no longer in qualitative methods limited to small non-representative samples. Yeah. When I started my qualitative work, I started mixed methods work. I would always think of the quant data as being the representative data, while the qual being a much smaller sample where you did a lot of in-depth stuff and sort of toggle between the two. That is no longer necessary. You can do qualitative work at scale. In fact, I'm starting a project where I'm doing just that across South Asia. But there are trade-offs. If you read the paper and the book, you'll see those trade-offs very clearly. Yeah? The book is far more nuanced, far more detailed. Human brains, our ability to analyze text data is much better than a computer's. Yeah? But it takes an awful lot of time. Computers do things much more quickly, but they give you big cuts. Yeah, they're a blunt instrument. They're not a nuanced instrument. Now, that will get better with time, but we are by no means there. I mean, you know, every time I say this to some young kid doing NLP, they come back and say, no, we have deep learning, we have BERT, we have Julia. Okay, but you're still not as good as a human brain. Yeah? Okay, let me stop there and take questions. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you very much, Viju. We already have some questions coming up in the chat. I think let's try first to get some questions from any of the MSc and PhD students who are here. If yours is one of the ones in the chat, you know, just raise your hand and maybe you can speak it to us. If not, I can relay. Okay, let's start with the ones in the chat then, so people can formulate their questions a little bit more. So we have two technical questions here in the chat. So one was, how did you decide that 15 was the optimal number for topics in your structural topic model? And another related technical question is, on average, how long are these documents that you're doing?
Yeah. So actually, we didn't decide on 15. We maybe I went too fast with that. We went between 15, 20, and 25. We tried all three, and we settled on 20 because that was giving us a set of topics. I mean, 15 was too narrow in the sense that the topics were so big that they were too obvious. There was not much nuance in them. 25 was too small, and we couldn't figure out what these topics were. So 20 gave us the appropriate size. It was basically just trial and error. Yeah. On average, how long can a document be? In the case of the Gram Sabha, you're talking about an average length of a Gram Sabha of 90 minutes. Then you transcribe and translate it. We're looking at 15, 20 pages of text. Yeah. Now, but in NLP, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can look at different types of documents. Sorry, you're talking about so that's the Gram Sabha. A document is a speech act. If you mean the way we're using the word document as a speech act, that varies. You know, a speech act can be 2 lines. A speech act can be a half-an-hour speech. Yeah. So there's a lot of variation in that.
Any other questions? Opening it up to the floor.
Let me just say, if anything is not clear in what I've said, because I had to go quite fast across 2 pretty complicated pieces of analysis, clarifying questions are welcome as well.
Well, I had a question, but here we have one here from Magda. Is religion of people important for their representation in Gram Samhas? Was it controlled for in any way? Maybe you could also mention, along with religion, caste and other major forms of identity.
Right. So, you know, in the first corpus that we analyzed with Oral Democracy, there are a couple of other papers. that I would refer you to that we've written on that, where we looked at those questions on caste and religion as well. Let's start with caste. Caste matters in the sense that it affects what people talk about. Lower caste folks also tend to be less wealthy. They tend to be poorer. Upper caste folks tend to be, landed. So they have different interests. So it matters in that sense. But we found no evidence that upper caste were dominating the conversation. In fact, we found evidence that at least in 2002, 2004 data, in the early stages of the Gram Sabhas, and I think it's gotten better now, so what we did, one paper we wrote, Soumitra Jha, Radu Ban and I, we wrote a paper where we, in 2002, we did a household survey of a representative sample of households in the village, where we asked them what their top 3 policy issues in the village were. I mean, 3 things they needed to get done. And then we match, so and that household survey, obviously we have all the characteristics of those household members. Then we can take the top 3 topics and match them against the topics that are talked about in the Gram Sabha, and then run a regression if that match is 1, right? So basically who's heard, yeah, or who talks. And we found it was in fact the median voter, yeah. So what does that mean? That, in political science and economics, median voter theory basically says if a democracy is an efficient democracy, then it satisfies the interests of the median voter, the person in the distribution of voters who's right in the middle. Yeah. In fact, Gram Sabhas do that. Yeah? So that's that paper. Religion was more of an issue. We found 2 things with I mean, of course, religion here is Muslims versus Hindus. Muslims, and I didn't do this in the Tamil Nadu data. This is really from the 2002-2004 data. I have an unpublished paper on this. Muslims tended to talk about Muslim issues. They didn't talk about what if you wish to call village public goods. They talked about very local public goods having to do with their community. Things like the graveyard, or that there was not access to this or that. That was one issue, and I'm talking about relatively. This is not a big trend; it's a relative trend. But the second thing, which is much more important, is that they were much less likely to speak. Yeah, much less likely to speak. So there's a clear sense in which, at least in that time, and I think it might even be worse now, there's a level of discrimination in voice across religion. Okay.
Okay, we've got 2 related questions here, having to do with language. So the first is, having many different regional languages and doing the analysis on the English transcription, how does that complicate your analysis? And then Rashida nicely pushes that further. Given how rich metaphor and expression can be in regional languages without a direct translation or inadequate translation in English, how do you account for this in your analysis, especially when where qualitative analysis looks for a deep meaning and locates it in context? For example, haq might easily translate to rights, but carries deeper meaning than right.
Right. So those are good questions. It's a limitation. It's a limitation. It's a limitation. So it's a limitation of scale, basically. Yeah. I've over the course of my career basically done it all. I've done very small, in-depth village studies. That's how I started out when I started doing more field work, and I've done this kind of work, right? So I've done the gamut of stuff. And clearly, when you're, like Eleanor does, when you're going off to a village and collecting your own data and spending a lot of time getting to know folks there, you have a much deeper understanding of things. Yeah. In NLP work, there are 2 distinct limitations. And in fact, remember this paper, the NLP paper I showed you, we finished it in 2015-16. So deep learning was not quite a thing then. Those of you who know NLP maybe know what I'm talking about. What happens with I mean, so you can use different types of methods. Let's divide them into 3: sentiment analysis, topic modeling, and deep learning, right? So sentiment analysis basically relates the speech to a dictionary of things that people have developed to sort of look at discrimination, look at emotion, look at that kind of stuff. So you're relating it to a standard dictionary. Those dictionaries are largely available in English. That's slowly getting better, but even as they're slowly getting better into other languages, they're not really rural centric. They're very urban centric dictionaries. Yeah. So I don't see those as being a good fit, which is why we went with topic modeling. Yeah. Because topic modeling lets the data at that time was the best thing we could do, and to let the data sort of, as it were, speak for itself. But the translation, what was interesting about the translations was the way I set it up was that in the 2004 data, all the transcriptions and translations were done in state, and the data collection was done in state. So I'm laughing because I'll just say something else. The Tamilians were doing the transcriptions and the translations with the Tamil head. The Kannadigas, of which I am one, were doing the transcriptions and translations with the Kannada head, and being a very proud South Indian, I can see the nuances of that in the text. If you read the book and you know it's South India, you'll see it in the book. Yeah. The way these things have been translated very much reflect that language. I gave a talk at the Bangalore International Center on this some time ago, and there's a video out there where I try to sort of give each transcript, I read out each transcript in the appropriate accent. So you can see the nuance of that. But that's not a substitute for Rishita's question, which obviously says that there are limitations, and they are. Yeah. And another way of doing this, I mean, part of this is there's another way, and which is I'm doing a book right now, along with Kripa Anandpur and Radhika Vishwanathan. We've been tracking the same 20 villages in Karnataka for the last 12 years. Yeah, 20 gram panchayats, and we've had local reporters. They're sending us data from these panchayats over the last 12 years. That's where I think, to me, that book will sort of be the complement to this one, at least for Karnataka. All this nuance comes in, yeah, methodologically. We can't do that here. Yeah. So each technique has its trade-offs, basically.
If I can piggyback on that, then, and maybe this will just let you give us a little bit of a preview of that book. I'm wondering, basically, what is captured in these transcripts, and maybe more importantly, what is left out. So you already mentioned to some extent those people who just aren't speaking, right? Or maybe aren't even showing up to the meeting in the first place, right? So you have occlusion that it's not in the transcript. So you might see no evidence of caste discrimination in the transcript, but the question is, well, what's not in the transcript, right?
Absolutely.
And then beyond that, there's, what is there beyond words, right? There was the case in the news recently in a Tamil Nadu panchayat meeting of a SC female panchayat member who was, seated on the floor, not seated in her chair. Purvi could talk about this more, right? So that wouldn't be there in the transcript, but is clearly a very visceral embodiment of some of these things, right? So
yeah, I read about that,
and all these things. What's not there?
A great question. I read about that. I saw that news story like you did, and I was very surprised.
Yeah, me too.
I've been spending an awful lot of time in Tamil Nadu villages over the last 10 years, and with self-help groups and with with the politics of panchayat politics. It's not Rajasthan. It's not. I mean, it should be demeaning my North Indian friends. But the point is, it shouldn't be happening in Tamil Nadu, right? So I really want to learn more about what the context was there. Okay. There's a lot of selection in Gram Panchayats. I mean, so let's start with the first question. And the question to ask is, what percentage of the village actually comes to a Gram Sabha, right? And as in all deliberative spaces, let me turn the question right around to all the faculty here. How many of you would attend faculty meetings if you didn't have to? So it's about between 2 to 5%. It's a very small percentage. Yeah, and obviously the people who are showing up for a reason. So the basically Pandey Rao paper is all about that. Who comes? Yeah, and what we found is that people come. The landed come because they have worries about water for their farms and stuff, and the poor come because they want to get benefits that they don't have access to. So they want to make a case for that. So and that means that there's a fair amount of Dalit participation because the poor come. Yeah? And then of course Dalits have access to various affirmative action programs that are allocated in the Gram Sabha, so they come for that reason. That doesn't mean that that's the average Dalit person or that's the average rich person. I mean, it's obviously selected. And then the second level of selection is who speaks. I mean, that's what the second paper was about, right? So yes, there is clearly that. There's a third level of selection in that we are watching an event in a point in time. We don't know what happened before the event, and we don't know what happened after the event. Yeah. I mean, if you read Jane Mansbridge's lovely ethnography of town hall meetings in Vermont and union meetings in Connecticut, you will see the richness of her work and what we are missing in our kind of work. Yeah, because she in fact she locates all those meetings in the context of what else is going on in those towns. Yeah, we're not doing that here. We're not doing that here, and that is a clear limitation. However, she looks at 2 towns. We're looking at 300. Okay, so there's a trade-off, right? So this whole the issue is really this. It's depth versus scale, and what I'm encouraged by with NLP is that it is helping us bridge that problem a little bit, but not solving it entirely. So there's a lot of thinking to be done, but how we get better at that. Yeah, there's no question about that. Does that answer your question, or was there another?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the other question was what evidence might you have there that's related to the speech acts but isn't in the transcript? So intonation, jokes, bodily movement. Is that sorts of things you have any insight to from the people who were there reporting? And
so what we tried to get observational data on is how people were sitting. We tried to get observational data on some of the other sort of preamble events, for instance, Independence Day, they hoist the flag, they sing the national anthem, that kind of thing. But overall, these events are so ritualized that there's not much variation in the Gram Sabha. Yeah. Now, also remember that Gram Sabhas are scrutinized events. Those minutes are public minutes. They're terrible minutes, by the way, if you, in case student is saying, oh man, I can analyze minutes. No, don't, they're terrible. And there's usually a relatively senior administrative official attending, like a BDO. Yeah. So people behave themselves much more. Yeah. In terms of doing silly things like having a woman sit on the floor. And I mean, I've never seen that happen. So I really trying to understand where that came from. But I mean, particularly in Tamil Nadu, I mean, if you've ever been to a Tamil Nadu Gram Sabha, man, people speak. And they speak loudly and vociferously. And there's a lot of pointing, and I got videos of this, and so we're just looking at their speech. We're not looking at the loudness and actually a lot of the jokes are in the book. So there are a lot of jokes in the book, not our jokes, their jokes. So you'll see that. Yeah, they can be quite humorous, but they're probably more funny in Tamil or Kannada or whatever. Right? What we're missing most of all is, for instance, in Kerala, we're observing the Gram Sabha as at that time, and these Gram Sabhas are incredibly boring. They're basically long recitations of decisions. We will do this, let me read it out to you, sort of see. Here we go. And this is literally the Gram Sabha. I should have kept this. Just give me 1 second while I pull one out. So, in Kerala, the Gram Sabha is the end point of a very, very long process of neighborhood meetings to higher level meetings. So Gram Sabha is just basically a report. I'm just going to read out like 5 minutes. We are in the last phase of financial year 2005-2006 planning. According to government principles, we are organizing Gram Sabha planning the development of the next fiscal year 2006-2007 as part of the new financial year 2006-07. We have organized working groups. The working groups have suggested some points. The Gram Sabha members. It goes on. This is the whole damn Gram Sabha, right? It's boring as heck. Yeah. Does that mean that Malayalis don't argue? No. But it means that we have not captured what happened before. And of course, we're not captured what happened afterwards. Were these decisions implemented, how they were, which is why we sort of decided to do this long-term study in Karnataka.
Porvi, you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. So speaking of the observational work that you were talking about, I was wondering if, even if you sort of didn't notice this in speech with regards to discrimination towards the lower caste, what about more subtle things like the idea of maryadai, of giving maryadai? Did that ever come up? Because there has been that acknowledgement in the literature, right? Along the lines of caste.
Yeah. You know, Indian villages have changed an awful lot. Yeah. And even in the time that I've studied them now, maybe 30 years. Yeah. Even in that time. And the two sort of, there's a demographic change where a lot of upper castes have moved out. Yeah. So what you're left behind, basically the Dalits who stay back and the rotating migrants. And so their families are there. They're off in the cities working, they come back. And of course, the other thing, and there's another paper I'm working on this, is that land ownership in many, many South Indian states anyway, is moving from upper caste to lower caste because people are getting out of the business of farming. Yeah, so that change is also happening. I'm not saying it's radically shifted. There's still the big man, there's still all that, right? But it's a lot more equal caste-wise than it was 30 years ago. As are notions of maryada, because wealth is no longer associated entirely with land. Yeah. So because of that, you know, I'll tell you what happens to me routinely when I go to any village, because I sometimes go with World Bank projects. You'll always find in that group, in that village meeting you've organized, not a Gram Sabha, in a regular village meeting, some guy who's constantly disrupting the meeting and then comes to you later and say, give me 500 rupees, I'll keep my mouth shut. And invariably, it's some guy from a poor family who's got a master's degree from Chennai. It's like trying to make a buck on the side because he knows how to ask the questions that be disruptive. These are all acts of rebellion, if you wish, right? So there are contexts in which, and also in the Gram Sabha, keep in mind that the big man never attends. Yeah, they don't attend. Their proxies or their lackeys attend. Sometimes the proxy of the lackey is the president. Yeah, but then there's sometimes two big men. I mean, you know, I'll give you an example. In Karnataka once, we were in Bidar, northern Karnataka. I was with my friend Jeff Hammer, a wonderful economist who happens to be white, and he and I were both there. And the village president, it was like a month before the election, the village president took us around for a tour of the village and said, I've done this, and so on and so forth. And then there was a village meeting. I'm not going to call it a Gram Sabha, it was a regular village meeting. And a lot of people came, including the opposition candidate. And what does this guy do? Jeff and I are sitting in the audience at the back. Yeah? Opposition candidate starts beating up the current president in front of everybody. Beating him up, I mean, socking him in the jaw. Why? Study, you know, you want to show that you're the boss, right? So those sorts of games, political games, have become far more apparent. This has become a hotbed of electoral politics and deliberative democracy, yeah, which is an equalizing force. One of the interesting things of the Gram Sabha is that it becomes sort of a level playing field for voice, relatively speaking, when all these caste issues disappear, because everybody's being scrutinized and watched very closely. Yeah, because you know they're all at the end counting on people's votes. You can't screw around with that. Yeah, these are your potential voters, right? So that politics starts playing a role. So that's a long answer to a very good question to say that it's complicated. Yeah, to observe those things in the Gram Sabha, which is why you need to do a deeper ethnography to understand how all that is playing out. But I hope I've given you a flavor of some of the things, at least that I've seen in that process.
Absolutely fine.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I can wait.
Thanks, Nimesh. Just a quick follow-up to that. And this is just to understand if you have a hypothesis or a feel for whether these results would translate or apply in the north of India, where Maryada is sort of an equivalent there, right? And perhaps whether there is a similar sense of that maybe not featuring as much.
Yeah, so the other place I've spent a lot of time on over the last 10 years is Bihar. And uh, what the biggest change in Bihar is not on caste, it's on gender. Yeah. And so we have a Paramit and I, in fact, with Shruti Majumdar, have a paper on that, showing how the self-help group movement has changed gender-based power relationships in the village. But it's closely related to caste, because as you know, patriarchy is at the end about upper caste domination. Yeah. But how women are working with that because of the self-help group movement is very interesting sort of movement in Bihar. But overall, the panchayat system is less sophisticated, it's less developed, if that's the right word, it is less participatory. Yeah? But it is moving in the right direction. Yeah. So Rajasthan, if you look at Gabby Cook's business, wonderful work. She doesn't look at Gram Sabhas, but it's part of sort of voice and accountability. You see things are moving there too. Yeah. Similarly, in many urban parts, I mean, that's the urban spaces. I'm not going to go into that. It's a completely different and very interesting and complicated story. So, like everything else, the South has come before the North, but the North over time will catch up, I think.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Nimesh.
Yeah, thanks, Viju, for that very interesting talk as usual. I was wondering, like, I think it builds on Ellie's point about what you could capture in this sort of, or what you miss as part of this deliberation. So in my limited research that I did in post earthquake Nepal, I had a chance to attend some of the public hearings that were organized. And what I found, more interesting was not the deliberation or conversation that were happening in these public hearing, but what the gossips and things that were happening in the periphery. Like people who are just sitting at, as you can imagine, in the villages, how not in the formal setting, but in more like government's term, like backstage conversation, as opposed to more front stage conversation. But as an ethnographer, it is extremely difficult to okay, what do you capture, like whether you focus on the front stage conversation or backstage conversation, because obviously there's that issue of like being here and being there, kind of like where do you be. And so as a lone ethnographer, it's quite difficult. So I presume, like in your case, you had a team of ethnographers, most likely working trying to. So what would be your advice in this kind of like, okay, where should we focus on if you are a single ethnographer? Is it a value to kind of focus on this backstage kind of conversation more based on your research? So
the obvious answer is it's very important. Obviously, it's important to do that. But the goal of the papers and the book I talked about today is not ethnography. It is to look, in fact, at the front stage conversations at scale, right? In other work, what we've done, and you're right, I mean, I've tried to sort of expand the sample size. I mean, so that's the advantage of working in the World Bank. I can get funding to do that, right? So we've been doing that in this book that we're working on, where we've had ethnographers is too strong a term. Let's call them village reporters, living in these villages, telling us everything that happened over the time that they were living there. So they lived there for about 6 years or nearby. And so we hired them for that time, sending us monthly reports of everything that happened. And that's the text that we're using. Now, does that just completely crowd out the need for small-scale ethnographies where somebody like you or somebody else is spending a lot of time in 1 or 2 villages understanding everything about it? Absolutely not. Yeah. It's a spectrum of methods, and my whole thing in life has been to say that all methods matter, but they matter for different reasons. Yeah, I think we were in a world at 20, 30 years ago, where all we saw in terms of qual work was small scale stuff. Yeah, and so we could learn only so much from that. We learned a lot, but a lot of depth, stuff. So my answer to that, as I said, when I started out, was to firstly do what I call participatory econometrics, where I did that field work. So I was essentially a lone ethnographer, but use those insights to develop larger surveys to see whether they generalize, right? And so, and I think obviously that's fine. But what I think we need to push the boundaries on is to see, while fully understanding the limitations of everything we do, start expanding the scope and the scale. Yeah. Now, what will happen? I mean, if you want to ask me to predict the future, which you're not asking me, but I'm going to do so anyway, is that computer science and linguistics is going to start slowly taking over the social sciences, which means that the analysis of text, it's already started, is going to become the dominant paradigm in how we do social science. Yeah, where everything is data. It's already big data, all that nonsense. So it's all coming in already. What is going to become slightly less important with this is large-scale quantitative surveys. Yeah, because people are going to say, I mean, the quantitative surveys have their own limitations, and that kind of data has its own limitations and deep limitations. Yeah, and if you can find ways of collecting that data. So one of the things I'm doing right now, for instance, is I'm very frustrated by, not very frustrated, that's too strong a word. I mean, when we assess poverty and well-being, we do it through quantitative surveys, whether they're consumption surveys or well-being, happiness surveys, whatever. These have deep limitations. I would rather let people express in their own voice how they're doing. So we're trying to now do this in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, in many, many countries. So at scale, where they get half an hour in a structured way to see how they're feeling, how they're doing, what their aspirations are, what their needs are. And we're going to use NLP to analyze that. Yeah, I think that's where things are going. What will always stay is the need for deep ethnography. That's never going to go away. It's a lot harder. Yeah, it may sound less sexy, but I think it's tremendously important. Yeah, if you read, for instance, one wonderful book, I forget the title, by Anand Pandian, who's at Hopkins. You'll see the value of that way of doing things. I hope it, and there's a tremendous value in that. And I think we can learn. And I've all my life had a foot in anthropology, so I've tried to learn from that. So yes, I mean, but logically speaking, do what you're doing, but no, not that one, Eleanor. It's a newer one.
The edited volume. In any case, this is a side.
Okay, yeah. So that's the one, Rishita. Yes. So I mean, do what you do, and you're doing it alone. So if you're doing it alone, you have the advantage of the ability to get more embedded, yeah, because you're doing it for yourself, and that embeddedness is tremendously important, yeah. So don't. I mean, what I hope I'm not doing is telling you that I am doing it the right way and you're doing it the wrong way. These are different methods. They have different values. They produce different things. And the solo anthropologist going off to do ethnographic work is always going to be a very, very important form of learning. Yeah.
You should be the cheerleader for our department. This is great. All methods matter, but they matter for different reasons. That should be our new department motto.
And second thing, question before method, always.
Absolutely. Absolutely. More questions? We've got an open floor right now.
I think Ivan has his hand up.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm also an anthropologist, and it's reassuring to hear that we're not completely irrelevant yet. No, my question was about the way you process the data. So as I understand it, you're really comparing different gram sabhas. I was wondering whether you made any attempt to do something more longitudinally, so where you observed gram sabhas in a single location and change across time, and whether that would afford you some kind of analysis of this data or not.
So in oral democracy, we tried. I think we have about 60 gram sabhas that are repeated in the same village over 2 years. Yeah. Without the other context, it's very difficult to do much with that. Because you can see how similar many of the discussions have changed, and we don't know why they've changed. So it didn't help us much, basically. In this new book, in this new work, we're following the same villages as had for 10, 12 years. So we're doing a lot more of that. Yeah,
thank you.
I've got another question, if I can be selfish. And this is prompted by when you were talking before about people sort of rebelling in the context of the discussions there. So I'm wondering, you have this measure of sort of who continues topics or who responds to a topic and keeps a topic going between. So who starts new topics, right? Who are the people who are who bring new topics into the discussion, and how might that play out in terms of gender and the rest?
Oh, wow, Eleanor, that's such a good question. I didn't even think of it. Yeah.
It should be possible, right? You should be able to get a measure of the novelty of a topic, right?
Should be.
Or novelty of a speech.
You can see who speaks, but I should have seen who speaks first. You know, I didn't do that. Sorry. Good question. Yeah.
When you have the answer, let me know.
I will. Yeah, I mean, you're also inspiring me now to maybe go back to the data. But yeah, by the way, the data is all public. So in case somebody wants to look at it, ask that question, you can. Yeah.
There you go. MSc student listening here. There you go. There's your dissertation project.
There's a question from, I think is that Martin House, M House?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
We're Twitter friends. Yeah. Okay. So he's asking, have I done work on political intervention to change power equations of public fora? No, I haven't. But as you know, Jeff Bitso, many others have been doing that kind of work, and I think it's very important work. But no, I haven't, except to the extent that we do it in oral democracy by because at the end, a Gram Sabha. I mean, so one of the interesting things about Gram Sabhas is that there's sort of the interest in them waxes and wanes, you know, because different governments like them at different times. The panchayat system in general, they get MLAs. I mean, the state legislatures get very upset when their powers disappear to local bodies, and then they pull power back. And then somebody like me comes along and says, "You guys are doing this wrong. You're not doing good policy," and it goes back in the other way. So over the last, so in that sense, supporting the panchayat system is not just an act of policy; it's a political act, and it's got to be seen that way. Yeah. To that extent, I study political acts.
All right. I know we've been going for a minute here, so let's give a moment for last questions, and then we can release you all. So, any final questions for Viju? All right. Well, then let's all thank Dr. Rao here once more. I think that was a wonderful talk and a great discussion afterwards. So thank you very much for coming and joining us. And
thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for all the questions.
Yeah.
Bye. Okay. Thank you.